Hey, do you teach yoga? Have you ever trained to lead yoga classes, to be a yoga therapist? Have you ever owned a yoga studio? Maybe even just wondered what it was like for the women and men up there in front of the room on their mats, leading you through endless Surya Namaskars, down dogs, and pranayamas galore? Well, these are their stories, and mine. I'm Rebecca Sebastian, a 20-year yoga teacher, 10-year yoga therapist, yoga studio owner, and co-founder of a yoga-focused nonprofit. I've done a lot in the yoga world over the last 20 years, pretty much everything except had a water cooler. You know, a place to share stories, talk about struggles, successes, and find other people who do the same thing that I do. Welcome to Working in Yoga, a podcast and substitute water cooler for yoga folks to connect and build community, to share our unique profession, our challenges, and our journeys with the world.
Friends, welcome to Working in Yoga. This week, I have the first of a two-part episode talking to Jenna Csont and Whitney Pasch about their jobs at a trauma therapy clinic in the Chicagoland area. One of the reasons I think conversations like this are so important is because we often in the yoga therapy world thought that these kind of jobs just didn't exist, that there was no 9-to-5 salaried job with benefits for any of us. And if we're being honest with ourselves, maybe we kind of even liked it that way. However, if you're like me, where the work calls you more than anything else, you'll quickly see how the work that Jenna and Whitney are doing is making a difference in their community. They get to share yoga in all its forms, not just the movement, with clients and patients and see firsthand the change that it can make in someone's life. And that someone is often a person who might not have otherwise found their way to one of our classes. Before we begin, though, if you would consider signing up for our newsletter, I would be so grateful. Each week, you'll hear from me about what's happening in the yoga world, and you'll get up-to-date info about the podcast, the magazine, and more. And if you're a subscriber to our podcast and you have been catching our limited Monday series called What Nobody Told You, let us know what you think. Head to workinginyoga.com/contact and drop us a line. It has been a ton of fun for me to make this series, and I would love to hear from you about what you enjoyed and what you want to hear me talk about next. If you haven't caught any of these mini episodes yet, they're dropping every Monday at 7 a.m. Central throughout May. Now, let's get into it with part 1 of 2 with Jenna Csont and Whitney Pasch. Friends, welcome to Working in Yoga. Okay, so I have a double guest duo this week, and I'm so excited because I feel like they're going to have things that you all want to hear. So let me introduce you to my new friends, Jenna Csont and Whitney Pasch. Jenna, Whitney, will you tell everybody who you are and what you do?
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. My name is Jenna, and I do use they, them pronouns just for awareness. My official job title is Somatic Therapy Manager now. I oversee all body-based programming at Skyway Behavioral Health, which is a behavioral health center. We have 2 locations now, one in Skokie and one in Downers Grove. And we primarily we're a PHP and IOP level of care. We primarily focus on complex trauma and eating disorder treatment as well. I've been with Skyway since the very beginning, so it's been almost 4 years at this point. When I was first brought on, I was originally hired as a yoga therapist, actually, and I had I think 7 or 8 interviews before I was officially hired there. Then my job has changed and evolved a lot over time. So I wear a lot of different hats there. I oversee our yoga therapy program and I supervise our yoga therapists. I do curriculum development. We have a group called Trauma in the Body, and this is a group where we really do a lot of psychoeducation and experiential practice on also why we include the body and nervous system in trauma treatment. And I also do training for our clinicians. So I train clinicians how to bring somatic skills into their both group and individual sessions and for themselves as well. Because I think working with, complex trauma day in and day out of how do we also avoid burnout? So that lens is really important to me of like working with the clinicians and the clients to be able to kind of care for everybody in that case. I'm also the co-chair of our diversity council. which I kind of formed the diversity council with another member, and we've grown and shifted a lot. We have 12 dedicated members. And so, bringing that work into all of my somatic work, it's like they go very hand in hand with me. So I'm and very involved with all of our kind of diversity practices and oversight and things like that we do within our organization. I do a bunch of other stuff too, but I'll leave it at that for now.
Whitney, tell us all about yourself.
All right. So I also work at Skyway. Jenna is my supervisor, and they brought me into this program. I'm very, very grateful. So I've been at Skyway about 9 months now, I think. And I'm a yoga therapist here. So I lead a lot of groups for both PHP and IOP level of care. And then I also see individuals on a case-by-case basis that are in PHP. So sometimes they'll have a solo session with myself or with Jenna, and then I'll also see them in groups. And before I worked here, I did contracted work at a variety of different places, which I would imagine if there's some yoga therapists and yoga teachers listening to this podcast that we are used to contracted work, right? Gigging and hustling a little bit. So I worked at a different treatment center before this, a couple of them actually, at IOP, PHP, and residential level of care. And then I had my own practice for many years and just saw clients on my own. So it was a big adjustment for me to move into a 9-to-5 and to be working as a yoga therapist that is part of a larger organization. And it's been really, really interesting. And yeah, I know we'll get into that a bit with with our discussion today. But yeah, that's who I am. I would say the biggest things that brought me to yoga therapy and made me want to study this, practice it, and then teach it to other people is chronic pain, living with chronic pain, managing that. I feel very inspired to share practices with other people and managing just different mood and energetic states, which is a lot of what we do here at Skyway. From anxiety and depression to a variety of things that folks are experiencing in life. That's what I'm really passionate about. And I think I'll leave it at that for right now.
Okay, I just have to say, even in your intro, I know that there are people, even yoga therapists who are listening to this, who didn't even believe this kind of work existed for us, that we could go from gig work to 9-to-5 work. So how the hell did that happen, y'all?
Yeah.
Jenna, will you just how did this come about?
Yeah, well, it's been a process, Rebecca. That is for sure. So mentioning earlier, I think I lost count, but when I first interviewed, so I actually was hired a little bit before Skyway officially opened, and I think I did 7 to 8 formal/informal interviews. I remember the day that our co-founder called me and for the first time and introduced herself, and she was like, we're opening this behavioral health center. She had gotten, I don't even remember how she got my resume. I was like, did I apply for this? And at the time I was doing a lot of it was on the tail ends sort of COVID times, and so I was like, oh, that sounds cool. But she was like, I saw that you're a yoga therapist. And she was like, I don't know what that is. And so a lot of our initial conversations were talking about, just what yoga therapy is, talking to her about how I was a teacher beforehand, the training involved to get to the point of being a yoga therapist. What are some of the practical applications of that? Chronic pain was a big focus area in my work as well. That I want to say like directly or indirectly led me into complex trauma work a little bit, because obviously not the same, and can be so anchored in dysregulation in the nervous system. And so, so many pathways that really brought me there. But, and I remember meeting with her. I remember meeting with their other co-founder, their COO. I did like a sample yoga therapy group for them. They were like in her basement at the time because we didn't have like our center yet. And after a lot of back and forth, they said they didn't know originally if they wanted, because originally I think they were talking about just hiring a group yoga teacher, essentially. And this just kept like changing and evolving. So I was hired, and I'm so grateful that I had these two co-founders who were just like, this sounds really cool, and this sounds really different, and we want to like build this, even though they were like, we don't know what this looks like, but they were like, you want to join? And I was like, yeah, let's do it.
Quick break to tell you about The Back Room, my Patreon community for yoga and wellness professionals. Here's what it actually is. Every week you get a focus prompt, reflection sheets, and a shared working rhythm that you can drop into on your own schedule. There's no live calls, no required check-ins, no one telling you to hustle harder. There's a quarterly book club and access to a growing archive of guides and reflections, all connected to this work that we do on the show. It's built for people who want to think more clearly about their careers without the noise of social media and public discourse. It's $8 a month, and there's a free tier if you want to try it first. Find it at thesunlightexperience.com/thebackroom, and the link is in the show notes.
So I started there, and originally my job was I was hired as a primary yoga therapist. I was doing groups across all of their tracks. So they have, and they kind of grew their tracks over time. They didn't all open at once, but over, many months, we had the amount of tracks that we have now. And I was doing groups across all tracks. It's just a required part of programming for clients. So really integrated into that. This trauma in the body curriculum, like sort of existed coming in the door. They had kind of some bones of it. It was like a little messy from like a consultant they were working with, and like some things they were doing. And basically they were like, adopt this. And so I was like, okay, so I kind of took that on, and I started working with individuals as well. And, I was also the education piece was always so essential and so important to me. And again, that I had people who were willing to like listen to me and like hear and be open to this kind of information, which is not always the case. So I'm so grateful that I had that opportunity. And so being able to consult with the clinicians, I went to all of their consult and staffing meetings. So basically I was treated like when I started, like any other primary therapist was treated. I went to all of their staffing meetings. I did all of the same trainings that they did. They did like DBT trainings and, CPT trainings. And of course, I'm not doing that job the way they're doing that job. And like to be able to have that level of overview was a complete game changer, because I was able to really be so integrated into that system, like without question. So I feel like it's like so many things, but essentially that's, that was kind of the starting point. And then eventually we grew big enough that, I was promoted within my role. Originally, I became somatic therapy specialist. And then they were like, we need to hire another yoga therapist because we need you to move more into an oversight role. And so then we hired another yoga therapist. And at our other, Teresa, who is at our other location as well, who is wonderful. She's our primary yoga therapist there. And so now we have people across locations. We are opening a third location next year. We're going to be in downtown Chicago, which is really exciting. And our somatic program really, I'm just so proud of, and this is not something I did single-handedly. I want to be clear, like a team of support, a team of people, and like so fortunate to have Whitney and Teresa to like grow this with me. And through word of mouth, through the work we were doing, people were like, we want this. And I think that just spoke for itself so much, and like why we were able to, like, a lot of people will come to our program now because they want to do somatic work within the trauma realm. And a lot of places don't offer it in that way. So.
Yeah. Okay, Whitney, same or similar question, but also, how did you hear about the job? Did you and Jenna, were you connected before this moment? How did all of that come about? Like, Indeed, what was involved?
Yeah. So I've known about Skyway for a minute because Jenna and I go back a little bit. We did not the same cohort, but almost back-to-back cohorts through inner peace yoga
Inner
therapy.
peace. That's me too. We're
Shout
all inner peace people.
out to Michelle. All right.
Thanks, Michelle.
We love you.
So Jenna and I knew each other. I knew that they were doing this work here at Skyway already. We've had like some communication about it over the years. And then we connected last spring. And there was a job opening, and I was like, please consider me. I really want to move into this. For a number of reasons. The 9 to 5 does offer a fair amount of stability. Like I said, a big adjustment from just like the lifestyle of bouncing around, right?
Yeah.
Going in and out. And there's the scheduling part, but then there's the whole like, I'm a collaborative piece of a whole now. And the adjustment to experiencing, and it really is a privilege to experience it, having yoga be so integrated within the widespread programming. So yeah, I'd heard about it, and then very lucky to be able to connect with Jenna and to be able to work here.
So, can I follow up with you, Whitney? Because I think that if you could give us a picture of what a group yoga therapy session is versus a group yoga class, because I am so confident that even yoga teachers don't know the difference between that. And then what would be the difference between seeing a client as a yoga therapist versus like a one-on-one yoga session?
Yeah, so I'll start with the groups. So the yoga therapy groups are very different than like a public yoga class that you might find. And I'm mindful of like letting people know this, especially if they're new to programming and they come in and they're like, they see a yoga room and they're like, oh no, you're making me exercise in front of people in a trauma treatment center? No, that's not what we're doing. But they're invited to get in touch with the nervous system. So the groups are, most of them are an hour. Sometimes they fluctuate in time a little bit, but there's always time for settling at the beginning. So as folks come in, to even like invite them to orient a little bit, we do a check-in. It's therapeutic, so there's usually a check-in prompt that folks are invited to share as we like keep the group element and go around the room. The practice itself is accessible. There are options for all bodies, and also I like to give options for different planes of gravity. And by that I mean, here's something seated. If you want to stand, here's something standing. If you want to lie down, here's something lying down. And you can play around with what your experience is with each of these. So there's choice. And I like to emphasize the agency piece quite a bit with the clients that we have here. So accessible, lots of options, and then very much meeting the energy in the room as best I can. And I say as best I can because let's say I'm going to teach a public yoga class, which I did for many, many years. I'm teaching a hatha yoga class at a yoga studio, and this is what I have planned to teach, and this is what I'm teaching. Like I walk in the door and I'm like, yeah, I do read the room, and this is what I've set out to teach. Suppose this is what we're doing. In a therapeutic group, I'm going to try to, again, read the energy of the room. And often, I should say, there's folks that are in very different places energetically. Some people might feel really, really jittery, maybe restless, agitated. Folks might feel kind of shut down. Maybe they don't have the bandwidth for much. So as best I can, try to meet the energy in the room, meaning 9 a.m. groups are generally very different than 2 p.m. groups, which is the end of the clinical day. folks tend to be pretty wiped out after a full day of therapy. And that's where the choices come in too, because when there are folks that show up that are presenting very, very different energetically, here's an option, here's another option. Can you take that and make it your own? And I invite folks to interpret it through their own unique lens, which is not necessarily the same way I would guide a public class. So public class, I guide more of the pacing. I would cue more to alignment and specifics. And those are probably the main differences that I can think of.
Before we keep going, I want to tell you about something I built because it didn't exist and it should have. Inside Yoga Magazine is a trade magazine for yoga professionals, not a wellness lifestyle blog, not a beginner's guide to down dog, a trade magazine, the kind that treats our work as the legitimate profession it actually is. It's digital, it's ours, and it's the first of its kind. If you've ever picked up a trade publication in literally any other industry and thought, why doesn't yoga have this? Well, now it does. You can find it at insideyogamagazine.com. The link is in the show notes. Okay, I really want to get into the nitty-gritty of the fact that y'all are yoga therapists, trained yoga professionals working in a Western medical setting. Like, can we get into that for a minute? Because I know that that's controversial. Like, not everybody believes that we belong in Western medical settings. And a lot of people who have found themselves in those settings have not felt like their skill set was respected. And I will say I have been very lucky in the medical settings that I have been in. I've worked at hospitals and therapeutic clinics. I felt respected, but I understand that's not everybody's experience. Can we talk about that for a hot sec, please? Like, Jenna, if you don't mind starting, like, tell us about that experience, what this is like running yoga therapy inside a traditional Western medical setting.
Yeah. It's, it can be incredibly complex, of course. And I always think about, I think about yoga's history of kind of always evolving too, right? Of like socially, philosophically, geographically, and like how, and even thinking about like cultural appropriation versus appreciation, and how do we adapt to a Western medical model, which could be like the $1 million question, while we're still doing that with like integrity and context and respect to the roots of yoga. And I think it's possible. I think we have to have very highly trained people in order to do so, working in that context, because we are asking them also to work with very vulnerable populations and do things that would maybe not be as accessible in working with in like any yoga class you might go into, especially in the West. And so, my immediate thought is like understanding why people have reservations about it, because there is many places where yoga is appropriated. Western medical model is a whole can of worms in its own right when we think about living in like a for-profit healthcare land. And right, of like what a gift we can give to people. I always, for myself, I'm just constantly coming to that, back to this place of like I am a borrower, and I am just it's not something I own. Like this practice is not something I own. And I want to be very clear with myself in my goals with that. I want to be clear with my clients. I do believe in, thinking about how we can parallel this to modern day neuroscience, not as a replacement. Not as a replacement, just as another way to increase language as an accessibility piece for people who it might not be accessible otherwise. And I actually think that's how we can connect it back to the roots of yoga when we do that. Because sometimes if we just come in and are immediately go there, right, even though we want to honor the roots, we can't even get people in the door. So being able to really help people anchor in their why in a way they can understand to parallel it back to like, let's respect these roots of where this came from and a philosophy of living that is really meant to be for all people. So I don't know if that fully answers the question, but those are some thoughts I have of just like, the belonging of yoga therapy in something like the Western medical model.
Yeah. Whitney, do you want to riff on that as well?
For sure. Yeah. So I think I'm going to echo some of what Jenna said. So one thing I think plays a huge role is education. Especially when folks are like, there's preconceived notions about yoga and what yoga is. And if we can educate on what it is, folks might be more open to it. And I know Jenna has worked really, really long and hard to do that. And I feel it. So I started working here, and yoga as a modality is it's more respected than in a lot of places where I've worked alongside or within Western medicine. And it's because there's that education piece.
Yeah.
So they're like, okay, I actually know what this is now, right? That's a huge piece. The other one is, again, I'm echoing something that Jenna said, which is that we're kind of coming back to the roots of yoga with what we're doing here in working with complex trauma. And sometimes I'll have new clients come in, and sometimes they come in before their first group and just kind of see the space. They'll get a tour, they'll meet a few people. And I try to give them a little rundown of like, this is what we're doing. We're getting in touch with the nervous system, And several times, clients who have had prior yoga experience or exposure to yoga will say something like, oh, it's real yoga.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm just like, oh, whatever your interpretation is fine. But a lot of, not a lot, but some clients come in and they're like, oh, it's not a fitness class, it's yoga. It's like, yes, we are truly honoring the roots. And that is like coming back to inherent wisdom, like getting in touch with what is inside, much more so than, and I'm saying this and I am not knocking on like fitness-based asana. I love to move. All of that is very, very fun. And it is different than what we're doing here. So for that reason, I think that the integrity is kept and is held.
All right, y'all, I'm going to ask a complicated question and you can tell me to go away. But here it is. You both have jobs working in a Western medical setting. Do we need a license to be yoga therapists in Western medical setting? And you can tell me to go away. You can say, this is a can of worms I wish to not unpack today, Rebecca. Move on to vacations, and we will.
I have maybe a few thoughts I'm willing to share on this because I do know this one is definitely a can of worms too. So, I do not consider myself an authority in any way of a decider of this either. I'm also incredibly aware of my privilege and the opportunity I've been provided to like weave into this setting. And I know that this is not the case widespread for those who are trying to get into yoga therapy as a profession. With that being said, I work so closely with all of our clinicians. I think I want to be mindful of how I'm saying this too, like the pros and cons of this, because I work very closely with all of our clinicians. I was like, is it going to be okay if I say this? I know insurance doesn't care very much about somatic therapy or doing yoga therapy, and so when which is why it can be a holdup or lack of investment in other places, because we know how beneficial it can be. And, insurance is focusing on these other markers that, are just so like Western based of like why something is valuable. And so, I see the strife the clinicians have to go through to like defend getting their clients more time. I see how that can even keep people in stuck places sometimes, because it's what are the right or wrong things to do to like get more time for people, is very, very complicated. And I have a lot of gratitude that we are working in the system like clinicians without having that pressure of licensure, of these markers that like even like ethically can be questionable sometimes, right? And I know that's like the system we live in, but I think that, my thought is, if we were like, yeah, let's do licensure, we would not be working the way we are working right now.
Yeah.
Within this
Whitney,
space.
Whitney, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, this is really interesting for me to hear too, because I don't know that much about what goes on with insurance and like behind the scenes. And there's a lot that I'm still learning about that in this role that I'm in right now. Because at previous treatment centers, like I said, it was contracted. So
Yeah.
I didn't have to like make notes for insurance or anything. Um, my like gut response when Rebecca, asked about licensure was like, yes, we need license. Like
Okay.
we need this. And my reasoning for that, and again, this is like you both said, this is can of worms. I am happy to be schooled on this if people have some strong opinions. But I feel like it would be a positive step for the yoga therapy profession to be taken more seriously in collaborative contexts. And I also think it would be maybe a little bit easier for yoga therapists working privately to bill under insurance. That is a barrier for a lot of clients, is the payment structure. Here we're at a facility, most folks pay through insurance, but when I was, running my own practice here in Illinois, it's out of pocket. And so I see how it could be really, really helpful. And Jenna, you brought up a really good point about how it would work within a larger setting. So I don't know. My gut still says yes, licensure is the way to go. And there's a lot that I don't know about that detail wise.
Yeah. And when I said pros and cons before, that's really, that's fully why I don't feel like I could say, yes, let's do it, or no, let's don't do it. Like, I think that, the way in which we quantify value and insurance, like getting reimbursement is a huge, huge piece. Having, regulated standards, so the specific training and like level at which people are, performing. I do think there's also opportunity to do that without licensure. Could do that with or without licensure. So yeah, so I'm not all one way or another, and there's so many different ways to look at this. It makes my head spin sometimes when I'm thinking about it, because there's so many different ways.
Okay. I mean, Jenna, I think you and I probably are similar in that way. I feel like at this point, I have asked enough people this question that I could argue solidly either way and be persuasive, because I see the pros and cons of both. So riddle me this. If we're going to work this out as an industry, because say we don't have an overarching body that is leading the charge of having these conversations, how do we have these conversations amongst ourselves? Like, how are we talking to each other as peers? Because again, like you, Jenna, I'm going to say I came from a place of privilege. I had clients as a yoga therapist who use their HSAs for my services, which is a huge benefit that they could come and use those for my services. And it depends on what your HSA rules are and how you bill them, of course. But how do we start having this conversation, presenting people with enough information that they can make informed choices about what their opinions are? Thank you so much, Whitney and Jenna, for this conversation. I know I am not the only one who will be thinking about ways to make these meaningful connections within the Western medical space. And don't forget that next week we will take up this conversation again with Whitney and Jenna, and we'll listen to them share so many good ideas for how to get started at this kind of work for yourself. You won't want to miss it. Until then, let's go get to work, and I'll catch you around the water cooler next time.